Picture this, the world's most powerful empire, the nation that would later preach about moral superiority and civilizing missions, waging war not for territory, not for honor, but for the right to sell drugs. This isn't the plot of a dystopian novel, this is the British Empire in the 19th century, and the drugs were opium. Welcome to one of history's most morally bankrupt chapters, where the phrase drug cartel could have been applied to Her Majesty's government. The empire's dirty little secret. By the 1830s, Britain faced a crisis that would make any modern finance minister break into cold sweats. The empire's insatiable appetite for Chinese goods, silk, porcelain, and especially tea had created a massive trade deficit. British silver was hemorrhaging into Chinese coffers at an alarming rate, while China showed remarkably little interest in British manufactured goods. The Qing dynasty, in its imperial arrogance, viewed Britain as just another tributary state bearing inferior products. But Britain had discovered something the Chinese wanted, even if they didn't know it yet: opium. The East India Company, that corporate behemoth that essentially ran British India, had stumbled upon liquid gold growing in the poppy fields of Bengal. What started as a medicinal trade quickly transformed into something far more sinister. British merchants, operating through Chinese smugglers, began flooding China with chests of opium paste. By the 1830s, an estimated 4 million Chinese had become addicted to the drug. Think about that for a moment. A European power was systematically addicting an entire population to fund its empire. The moral implications were staggering, but the profits were even more so. The dragon awakens, enter Lin Zexu, a Qing official whose moral clarity would put him on the right side of history. Appointed as imperial commissioner in 1839, Lin arrived in Canton, modern-day Guangzhou, with a mandate to end the opium trade once and for all. His approach was refreshingly direct. He confiscated and destroyed over 20,000 chests of opium worth millions in today's currency and demanded that foreign merchants sign bonds, promising never to deal in opium again. Lin's letter to Queen Victoria remains one of history's most elegant diplomatic burns. Your country lies 20,000 leagues away, but for all that the way of heaven holds good for you, as for us, and your instincts are not different from ours. For nowhere are there humans who are not humane, nowhere people who are not conscientious. The subtext was unmistakable. How can you, as a moral human being, justify poisoning our people for profit? Britain's response: gunboats. When an empire chooses drugs over dignity, here's where the story takes its most shocking turn. Faced with Chinese resistance to their drug trade, the British government, not just merchants, but the actual government, decided to go to war. Foreign Secretary Lord Palmerston declared that British honor was at stake. The irony was lost on no one, except, apparently, the British. They were literally fighting for their right to be drug dealers. The First Opium War, 1839 to 1842, was a technological massacre. British steamships and modern artillery faced Chinese war junks and medieval fortifications. It wasn't a war, it was target practice. British forces systematically destroyed Chinese coastal defenses, occupied key ports, and held the empire's economy hostage until China capitulated. The Treaty of Nanking in 1842 didn't just end the war, it institutionalized drug dealing. China was forced to pay massive indemnities, cede Hong Kong to Britain, and open 5 treaty ports to British trade. Most importantly, the treaty said nothing about opium, effectively legalizing the drug trade that had started the conflict. But here's the kicker: the British, having won the right to sell drugs legally, immediately ramped up production. Opium imports to China doubled, then tripled. The East India Company's poppy cultivation in India expanded exponentially. Britain had literally weaponized addiction. If you thought the First War was morally reprehensible, the sequel outdid it in every way. The Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, began over the most trivial of pretexts: Chinese customs search of a Hong Kong registered vessel. But this time, Britain had an ally: France, which had its own imperial ambitions in Asia. The Anglo-French alliance unleashed unprecedented destruction on China. They occupied Beijing, forcing the emperor to flee his own capital. In an act of cultural vandalism that still resonates today, British and French forces systematically looted and burned the old Summer Palace, an architectural and artistic masterpiece that had taken 150 years to build. Lord Elgin, the British commander, justified the destruction as punishment for Chinese treachery. The real message was clear: resist our drug trade, and we'll erase your civilization. The mathematics of moral bankruptcy. By 1860, the numbers tell the story of Britain's drug empire. Opium constituted nearly 20% of British India's total revenue. The East India Company was processing over 87,000 chests of opium annually, each chest containing 140 pounds of pure narcotic. Conservative estimates suggest that by the 1880s, over 10 million Chinese were opium addicts. Britain had achieved what no empire in history had managed. They had turned drug dealing into statecraft, addiction into foreign policy, and moral bankruptcy into national strategy. The reckoning. The most damning aspect of this entire episode is not just what Britain did, it is how they justified it. British politicians and merchants wrapped their drug trade in the language of free trade and civilization. They argued that China's resistance to opium was evidence of their backwardness, their refusal to embrace modern commerce. This wasn't just hypocrisy, it was gaslighting on a civilizational scale. Britain was simultaneously positioning itself as the champion of Christian values and moral progress, while systematically poisoning millions of people for profit. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain this worldview was breathtaking. The legacy of imperial addiction, the Opium Wars, didn't just humiliate China, they fundamentally altered the trajectory of world history. The century of humiliation that followed shaped modern Chinese nationalism and continues to influence Beijing's worldview today. Every time Xi Jinping speaks about Western imperialism or China's historical victimization, the ghost of Lin Zexu and those burned opium chests hovers in the background. For Britain, the Opium Wars represent something more complex than simple historical embarrassment. They reveal the empire at its most naked, stripped of the civilizing mission rhetoric that usually accompanied British expansion. Here was imperialism reduced to its core elements: power, profit, and the willingness to destroy anyone who stood in the way. The next time you hear about the war on drugs, remember that there was once a war for drugs, and it was waged by the very empire that would later lecture the world about morality and civilization. In the annals of imperial shame, few episodes match the brazen audacity of Britain turning itself into history's most successful drug cartel, complete with gunboat diplomacy and government backing. The Opium Wars stand as a reminder that empires, no matter how powerful or seemingly righteous, are capable of breathtaking moral failures when profit and power are at stake. They also remind us that history's villains rarely see themselves as villains. They see themselves as pragmatists, realists, and even heroes of their own narratives. In Britain's case, they saw themselves as champions of free trade. History, thankfully, sees them differently.